Take three. So when those the micro the not the microbiome, the immune system attacks LPS, biofilm, extracellular matrix, call it what you want. It is trying to get to the little organisms, bacteria. That is what it's trying to attack. The bacteria are under the nice rubbery protection, LPS, laughing at the immune system. And every time they laugh at the immune system, cells or the immune system, whatever we call those little immune system behavioral cells, they get angry. And they get angry because you have somebody laughing at them while they are literally shooting the bad big artillery. So the immune system calls for an armored car, and then the immune system fills with the armored car and it calls for a rocket launcher. Pow, pow, pow. But you see, this is your gut, this is LPS here, this is your immune system. Bow, 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 bowing. And this is not getting destroyed by the armored car, the tank, the rocket launcher, or whatever. Because it doesn't matter if it's antibacterial from your mouth, those you get from the doctor, or those you take with your herbs, or those that are coming from the natural immune defense. LPS, or the biofilm that LPS creates, and again, biofilm is just the house, whereas LPS is just the individual umbrella. It doesn't matter, they are well strong against these things. But what we have to do is break LPS first. Now, what we have not been doing is breaking LPS. We have always just been doing one thing. We have just been targeting the bacteria, which is already protected inside a little home. They're inside there. So these bacteria are creative. They know how to evolve. They have been evolving, and they have a structure that allows them, just as our cells, our DNA cells, replicate the information from one, what I call the newt cell, from one newt cell straight into the other newt cell, and we call them stem cells. They are blank, but they are blank with a library of the entire system from its creation. So notice they are blank but with a library for reflection. Software engineers would understand the power of reflection. And so when a stem cell is called into action and it becomes differentiated, it reflects onto the code, the copy of the code that it has at that point in time, and it chooses to act on or activate these codes. And therefore, whether it's a red blood cells, it knows to behave like a red blood cell, but of course it's looking back. It's looking back. And that is where we need to understand the here and now for looking forward. Because if you are treating your body in a certain way back then, the cells that you have manifesting in its activity, when it is activated as stem cells within the next few months, literally is a copy of you back then. Now, that's why when you start fixing yourself, you still realize it wouldn't happen overnight, because those cells are 3 months old, 6 months old, and they are reflective of that position. But when you start treating yourself right, you're being kind to yourself, you start doing the right nutrition, you start thinking right, the copy of your master code, and your master code is not your DNA, it's just your master code, which get replicated into DNA. It's something that cannot be changed really as time goes by. It's there, and it's evolving, it's changing, it's updating, it's activating, it's turning things on and off. But that is what gets copied into any cell that is being created at a point in time. But the cell does not go into activity immediately. The cell goes to that state of wait. It's when the cell is called upon, it becomes called upon by a function of the body, and that function of the body will tell the cell, I want you to become a red blood cell, a transporter, or I want you to become an immune system cell, a battle attack warrior. And so the cell looks at itself, it looks into itself at the master code, and that copy of the master code was copied maybe 3 months ago. So it looks into itself and it sees what a defender or a transporter looks like and what job it starts to perform, and it converts itself into that. Now, this is the role of our whole manifestation of the human being. So, when we understand this at the microscopic level, we understand the consciousness being entrenched, being entrailed in us at this point in time allows us to create our future or create ourselves or recreate ourselves better as we go forward, because we are taking actions in the present that would instruct our master copy to activate certain instructions or to deactivate those that we don't want, turn them off, or to create better or create newer instructions in the master copy, so that a cell 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, when it becomes manifested, when a cell becomes created, it goes to rest, but it goes to rest now with this new warrior powers, this new immune system powers, this new mental powers. It goes with that. So all cells then knows to reflect a really bigger, brighter future when they get created and differentiated in the future. That's a future plan, but the future plan only could be an incorporation of your present steps today. Now, how does bacteria do it? Bacteria does the same thing. They evolve, and they have been evolving and replicating. They might live short, but they are replicating the entire structure, and they are translating the message to the newborns to say, you are no longer, back in the seawater, back wherever 10 million years ago or a million years. You are now in this situation where, as you come out, what you are good at is looking for your sugars as food, converting that into LPS. That is now what we call advanced technology. The newborn bacteria is immediately a master from birth to do exactly and even improve upon that of its parent, if you want to say so. Faster, better, stronger. Now, what we have to do to deal with these things? Let us think about what we have been doing before and how we have strategized. In all wars we strategize, and in this war we have to strategize. Now you may say, why are you calling it a war? Well, it is a war because the bacteria are, and we have to come to the consensus that the bacteria are not in our bodies only to eat glucose and make things terrible for the physical body, but they are there to control our mental faculties. They do that through the same messaging system called hormones, the same messaging system that should be controlling our messaging signals through that whole endocrine system. They use that same pathways to control the human being and to turn on and turn off certain behaviors, so that the human being appears to be behaving in certain ways that is unexplainable by the human sight, but explainable because the bacteria inside are now at a certain amount where they are able to create enough of a certain hormone, a chemical, to send enough of that into the brain, as we say, so that the brain does exactly what these things wants them to do. Where do they get their instruction from? That is one thing that you might be surprised about, that they are instructed from an external entity or external entities based on which breed of bacteria that are vying in your kingdom. They are getting the signals using the same kind of systems we use, same kind of cellular radiation systems. They get a message and they will do what they have to do. So reading bacteria is not only for a health benefit physically, but it is also for you to clear your mind. Why? Because when you have an overabundance of bacteria, they come together. It's like that movie, The Great Wall of China, when you see that those big whatever, that's the movie explaining to you how the bacteria gets the signal. She opens her big thing and she gets her signal and she sends out whatever and everybody attacks. They are coming together to create enough of the hormonal chemicals to send to the brain. The target is the brain. Their food is coming through the gut, but the target is a chemical signal to the brain to make you behave the way they want you to behave, to make you think the way they want you to think. And so getting rid of certain amount, quantum of bacteria, so that those messaging signal gets destroyed, that is not powerful enough, is a most critical factor in getting rid of the bacteria and the other microbes. And it starts by understanding how they protect themselves. Again, they protect themselves because they are living in this cave. That is a well structured LPS cave. That is the first step. You have to break the house, and then once they are exposed, the antibiotics could kill them. Very easy to kill, very, very weak vessels, but the homes, the LPS structure is very difficult to crack by our conventional treatment and even by our bodily treatment called the immune system. And what is worse, the immune system targets their home, but because it is sending stronger and stronger bombs, every time it chooses a bigger rocket or bomb, it's damaging the lining of the stomach walls or the small intestinal walls, and that is in itself a challenge, because what happens, those same bacterias, when they die, the pieces don't even get digested, but it goes through the wall, or they themselves find a way to say, let's check out what's going on here. They go into the wall and they get into the bloodstream up to the liver, creates havoc for the liver. Now, saying all this means we have to ensure that we deal with this, because let's track one of those bacteria traveling to the liver, goes to the liver and starts saying, I need now to set up camp in the liver. And they set up camp in the liver, and of course what they need is glucose. So they would send more signals to say we need glucose, and you would start eating more and more carbs. Now, eating carbs to satisfy them in your stomach would not be what I call overconsumption of carbohydrates. It is when they get into the bloodstream to the liver, you start seeing how they exasperate the demand for carbohydrates, because the carbohydrates coming into the gut, they could also convert, especially if you fall to things like starch and the thing we call fiber. They are more happy to have that. So what they would do, they would use starch and fibers because it stays a little longer, it's a little more firm, so they could munch on it. They have more time to munch on it as compared to what we will discuss later on, let's say fats, oils, and protein. So when you look at that, they get to the liver and they demand more and more glucose, and they know that the liver is a place where extra glucose should come in, and they would consume glucose, but they are getting it already pre-digested or properly digested, whereas in the gut they actually spend time doing some fermentation, gut fermentation, to get out the glucose. They literally eat all kind of things just to get to the glucose molecule in the stomach, whereas in the liver they find it's a better opportunity because it's already pre-digested, it's in glucose format. So they use it and they create a havoc in the liver, and that is when you start seeing things like, hey liver, you're not functioning well. Why is it that you have all these challenges, fatty liver disease, so forth and so on? Why is it that you cannot metabolize fructose and alcohol so properly? Simply because they are looking for the glucose and you are bringing in fructose, and they don't like fructose because fructose itself is a ketogenic sugar. So they start messing up the body and pushing fructose to make fatty liver, and pushing alcohol, because the alcohol molecule is, while it is supposed to be metabolized as well, fructose and alcohol are two sugars they don't like because it is not glucose. They are glucose affiliated, and fructose and alcohol is of the same nature. It's really messed up for them, and the liver gonna get a real big wound for that. So this is not science, so don't quote me. So when you go to that there, they start looking around for places to mess up the flow of glucose. So what they would do is then study the chemical messages from the liver or between the liver and any other blood flow association and controlling mechanism. They would detect that somehow glucose is not flowing fluidly to the liver, even though they are seeing or getting messages from the friends in the gut that a lot of glucose is available. They start observing the glucose is not coming to the liver, but the glucose seems to be coming to the blood. And so they would then figure out they need to understand Why? And that is when they go observing and they realize that there is something called insulin. So they would have traced now over years. Remember, this is happening over thousands of years. They would have traced and see that the pancreas has a specific amount of cells that is called today in science beta cells of the pancreas. The pancreas have a set of cells that is quite an instructive piece of operation that creates a specific fluid which we call insulin, and that fluid seems to be doing something that would cause glucose to rush to places that is non-liver. And so they looked at that, and what they would have done over the years is gone to the pancreas and start mimicking, turning on, turning off, playing around, tweaking, sending those things to the pancreas to ensure that the pancreas cannot make a certain amount of insulin. So then we found now that the pancreas, who's responsible in its beta cells to make insulin, cannot really generate insulin properly in some cases, and in some cases they are, well, in both cases, whether it's type 1 and type 2, what we call the diabetes, the insulin production creation process is challenged, and in many cases you would have to take insulin because your insulin production is not in comparative to the amount of glucose that you are utilizing. And then you would see a lot of the glucose coming from the liver is flooding your bloodstream, and you are wondering why, even though those bacteria might be utilizing the glucose, and you will understand why in a while. So they would have targeted the pancreas, damaged the pancreatic cells, the beta cells of the pancreas, and we would have started falling into the trap of insulin. Now we continue to feed their population in the gut with consumption of carbohydrates-based substances or glucose sources of glucose. We continue to have glucose going into the bloodstream. We continue to have them functioning by the liver. But the challenge with the liver, they cannot survive in the liver for long, because the liver has a function that is so secure, it creates an opportunity to get them out as soon as, irregardless. It's called the detoxification process of the liver. So they have not been able to actually survive in the liver, even though they would have tried. And that is why we see them going to the pancreas. So they go to the pancreas and they would damage the pancreas, the pancreatic beta cells, and hence we have the insulin issues. And then they would have gone to places like your knees, your joints, and you have arthritis. They would find themselves in non-flow passages, and in some places where plaque would have built up, you would find them there too. And they would find themselves in the, of course, the joints, and that's why you have joint pains and stuff like that. And so the release, the control between the pancreas and the joints is really the creation of what I call the intelligence. In order to get enough sugar to the joints where they are now living, they know that the blood sugar levels must be high, very high, because what happens when the blood flows from the liver up to the heart and the upper parts of the body like the brain, they cannot really survive up there very well. So they would say to themselves, by the time the blood reaches down by us, we do not have enough glucose in the blood to satisfy ourselves. So we need to make sure that there is a lot of blood flow in the system with glucose. And so they would have killed the insulin production to ensure that as much glucose is coming from the liver using the reverse process of storage, neoglucogenesis, to bring back sugars into the blood. And they would have, of course, turned off the production of insulin so that the blood sugar levels would be frail in getting the opportunity to enter some of the cells where glucose cannot enter without the presence of insulin. So they turned off insulin to make sure that the glucose does not get to go in. And so they are doing this to ensure that the blood comes with as much glucose to the knees and the joints, the elbows, and those parts of the body where they seems to want to build their homes. They need the glucose to build their homes. Again, LPS, lipopolysaccharides, saccharide sugar. And so they are doing this to ensure their own feeding. Now they are not moving about, they are using the same messaging pathways, so they know how to communicate to the pancreatic beta cells, where those who resides there are actually turning off production. And so when we look at these things from a bacteria or a microorganism point of view, you start realizing they would have found over another set of years the way to turn off so much that they could now exist in places like the brain to give us dementia. That is where they consume these sugars that should have been going to the brain. They have found pathways to do that. So what we need to do? Well, we need to sit and say to ourselves, admittingly so, say to yourself, all this garbage he just said there does not make sense, but is there anything of value from what we could learn to in this lesson? Then you say, okay, there is not enough value from what he would have said, but let's see what he would say going forward. So let's listen a little again. Now, if the bacteria are living and building their structures by the creation of, or the weaving together of lipopolysaccharides, then you need to control your saccharides input, the glucose input, because that's the creation, that's the raw material. Like it or not, folks, that's the raw material. Our raw material is protein, and our energy material is fatty acids. So our raw material is amino acids. And so the glucose that they consume, they go ahead and they consume it in such a way that they are abundant. It has to be in abundance. So if we start reducing the abundance of glucose from the gut, it does not mean you are killing the glucose creation internally. The glucose creation internally meaning liver could make glucose, fatty acids is another source of energy, amino acids in excess could be converted back into glucose, and then there are other energy systems of the body that could actually kick into play, so you would not be short. So if you remove or reduce a lot of carbs, what you increase on your fatty acids, your good fats, or whatever fatty acids, and you improve on your amino acids intake, which is your sources of protein, you may sooner or later start realizing you are bringing yourself in a state where the bacteria in the gut, which is the main source, that's the source of origin, they are now becoming a little bit weaker. Now what science would tell you is that you would bring yourself in a state of ketosis, and you would have seen all your late papers speaking about ketosis is great to break down LPS, meaning that if you have a ketogenic type BHB, keto PHB, if you have ketosis taking place, like you are on a meat-based diet with whatever keto or carnivore type style you find yourself in, eggs, meat, fish, those kind of non-sugary food enter in your mouth, and you have digestion taking place over time, you have ketone bodies, which actually breaks down LPS. What is LPS again? So LPS is a house. Here we go. So just the diet of ketosis, the ketone bodies created by the liver, flooding the system, breaks the LPS of the homes, and the acid in the stomach returns because remember, let's start with the stomach. Those LPS is blocking gastric production of acids, but as soon as the LPS is broken by the ketone bodies, we find ourselves returning to a better state of wellness. We find things like NAC, which is a big supplement to make glutathione, a detoxification level substance in the body by the liver. We find that is very effective of breaking out the LPS. And so we start paying attention to those things and start saying we need to get rid of those bacteria. Eventually, if you keep that pattern going, what happens? Even the pancreas, which is again the pancreatic beta cells, are covered with those same bacteria, locking in the pancreatic beta cells or stifling the pancreatic beta cells from the production of the protein insulin. They are literally blocking the beta cells So the beta cells are stifled because of the LPS that they would have created on the beta cell. It's only one strategy they have, creating LPS, and LPS eventually bonds together to create what is called biofilm, a mucus-like substance. So utilizing something like chitosine, NAC, you would see the difference. Chitosine or chitosine would break down LPS in the gut, but NAC breaks down LPS in the gut directly by impact, direct targeting, but it goes into the liver and start breaking down LPS. Again, the liver would not have much because it cannot survive much around the detoxifying organ of the body. But the liver would create more glutathione, and then the substance gets to the down to the pancreas to help clean back the pancreas by dissolving the LPS on the beta cells of the pancreas. Therefore, you start realizing your pancreatic beta cell starts functioning better, meaning to start making insulin again. So the flow of insulin, which was inhibited by this layer, so if this was your normal layer of insulin beta cells, and you have 1 LPS, 2 LPS, 3 LPS, so remember LPS is like camps, they are blocking the flow of the insulin. It's not that insulin cannot be created, because creation is of a mental state. You're always, I need to create insulin, I need to create insulin. Are you feeding yourself enough amino acids? Yes. So once you have amino acids coming in, insulin could be created, because the raw material of insulin is amino acids, again protein. But what is happening when it goes to be created? It's blocked at the beta cells. So imagine if this was 500 beta cells, as you have more LPS, 499, 200, 300, less and less insulin is being created. They are covering the pancreatic beta cells with a mucus-like substance called LPS, or the biofilm. So it would take some time to restore the beta cells of the pancreas through a concerted effort of using something like NAC. Now, NAC will break down the layer of the LPS. NAC may not kill the bacteria themselves, but what you have to think about is the body defense mechanism is good enough once you are keeping yourself within proper structures, and you might be consuming some herbal things, the cinnamon, the berberine, the cloves, the many antifungal things that you, the turmeric, ginger, many antifungal things you have already been eating. The reason why they were not working is because LPS was just blocking them. And so now you start breaking down LPS with something like NAC. You would realize over time your ginger, your whatever you're using, even some antibiotics from the doctor, whatever, starts killing all the bacteria. Your insulin production comes back up. But of course, you have to scratch your head and ask yourself the question, has this been proven? That is what the carnivore diet, that is what the ketogenic diets are doing. They are doing it unconsciously because they are bringing the essential nutrients back into the body, which includes the cysteine group that would help the liver create glutathione and maybe cysteine itself that breaks down LPS in the body. Therefore, you realize that ketogenic body is an LPS reading body. And you might study and you might see research showing LPS in the gut only, but LPS is all over. What we need the science to do is to inspect things like the beta cells of the pancreas to show what is happening on the beta cells of the pancreas at the microscopic level when you have type 1, type 2, whatever diabetes issues where insulin production seems to be very low. Now you start understanding this, you start saying to yourself, getting into ketosis ever once in a while, which means fasting ever so once in a while, is not so much a critically bad idea. It is a wonderful idea, because what you will be doing, at least you will be releasing the LPS within that fasting window, so that these pathogens could of course naturally be killed by your immune system, because once you expose them, they get the easy target for the immune system cells. Wipe them out, kill them, damage them easy. and of course the body would get a little bit of Alzheimer's reaction, a little sickness would come about, but you would spew that out and you would get rid of those things over time. This is what we need to understand, why fasting is such a critical thing and why we need to stay away from drugs, which is called stay away from excess refined carbohydrates, because it is a war that you are fighting against these pathogens, and you cannot be fighting a war and feeding the enemy at the same time. You need glucose. Let your ketogenic sources bring in the glucose. They would create the glucose on demand for you if you need them. If you are working out in a ketogenic space and you have your fatty acids and you have your amino acids, so therefore listen to what we are getting at here. Once you are nutritionally rich amino acids of sorts, that's eggs, liver, butter, milk, meats, whatever, and you have those fatty acids and you have good hydration, what salt and electrolytes coming in, because you are eating from a place that has all the nutrition that is necessary from the body, and you have reduced, so you come with maybe things like broccoli, cauliflower, with all that, tie that in nicely, and you have reduced to close to zero of your carbs, whether it's rice or flour-based substances or whole fruits or whole provision, ground provision. You have cut this thing completely out of your diet. You would start realizing you start getting sick. Your sickness is not brought to you there and at that point by the foods you are eating. Your sickness is brought to you there and by the death, the immediate death within 7 days. Immediate death within 7 days of so much LPS houses broken apart, and then your immune system kicks in gear, because once it sees these little parasites, once it sees these bacteria, it starts killing them, and they have to come out of your body. And of course they go through the bloodstream and they get out, whether it's soluble, it gets out through the urine, so you would have to urinate a lot, meaning you should start thinking about your hydration so that you could pee. And then what doesn't make it through the kidneys comes back up to the liver sees it, grabs it out of the blood and pushes it in the bile. And so you have to be conscious that if you are pushing out toxic substance in the bile, it goes to the gallbladder. If you don't eat fats, then the gallbladder don't get squeezed, and if the gallbladder don't get squeezed, then it doesn't come down into the duodenum, meaning you don't get it out into your number 2. And that cycle is what we need to understand in 2024 from a layman perspective. Your battle cannot be fought by consuming the substance, the substrate, the inputs of the bacteria. You cannot beat the bacteria on a fruit, vegetable diet, carbohydrates, refined food diet. You may lose weight, but which you might be losing protein. You may lose fat. Doesn't matter. You are feeding the bacteria. And so if we go down the road of understanding what we need to do, then we start walking along a strategy that says we need to restore our organs, which simply means we need to have the organs breathing, which means we need to break away that mucogenic layer that is blocked up with what all his naturopath was talking about, mucus, which is not what you're thinking. It is actually the homes of bacteria. This whole mucus stock is LPS, Lipopolysaccharides. And to get rid of lipopolysaccharides, you have to make strong concerted efforts, directed efforts. You have to find substances that could break LPS not away from your gut only, but in the body, in places like your pancreas, in places like your joints, your knees. These are the places where they go and survive. They go to the joints and the knees. And what are in the joints and the knees? Why you're having all this arthritis? These are where the LPS bacteria makes their home, because the blood flow there seems to be always challenged. If we are not moving, it seems to be stagnant. So where things are stagnant, it's easier to trap. You go in a river and you notice the basins are easier to trap the crayfish. That is what they are using, and they are using your joints and your knees. So you always have the joint pain. Your joint pain is because the inflammation when they are creating LPS. And how they are creating it? They are administering themselves by pulling the glucose out of the blood and combining it with a little bit of protein and fat and making new homes and new houses. The immune system is coming, and the immune system is targeting the place, seeing the bacteria and seeing the off guard, and the immune system is just fighting itself and busting your proper muscles and making you see pain, all in the cause to save you, but you cannot be saved because you are feeding those things. Your pancreas, same challenge. They are right there upon the beta cells of the pancreas, covering the beta cells of the pancreas, and so your insulin production seems to be dwindling. In your stomach acidity has gone down. You cannot digest meats and protein into amino acids. You cannot get your minerals extracted from whatever you're eating, and you say, oh Lord, I'm eating so good, but yet for things are not getting in. Why? Because they have created this mucogenic layer upon the walls of the stomach, and so the gastric cells are smudged with this mucogenic layer of LPS, and hence we need to understand this is the strategy that we need to push forward and understand how to get rid of, how to break down LPS both in the external environment like here, or in your mouth, or in, let's say, in the pubic parts. If you have any of those, look into substances like NAC. Chitosan, as I said, is good for internal because it would help in the gut system, but it's not something, it's a binder. It's good at binding and grabbing onto this mucogenic layer and dragging it out. But NAC is good at that level, and NAC is great at the internal level. So chitosan would help, or chitosin, or whatever you want to call it, but NAC would help also. And once you have that, you would start seeing your antibiotics from our GPs or from our doctors already. If you're following this natural path, antibiotics from the different plants, you'll start seeing them being effective because they would start killing off the bacteria. The clove, the wormwoods, they would start killing the bacteria because they now have access to the bacteria. Folks, I thank you for your time. If this was ever of use to you, please hit me a like, not a like, sorry, I don't know likes. I need a comment, and I need you to become conscious of what you are dealing with. Thank you so much. Look for my link in the website somewhere on this article. This is not a research-based article. This is a combination of many different papers, but what I call a visionary concept. To put the old, which is, we fought bacteria in the old days. People like Dr. Hulda Clark was very much on the theory of bacteria are causing our infection. People like Rife with the Rife machine. We need to get rid of those bacteria and parasites by turning on frequencies. They saw part of the puzzle. More modern medicine would have done research to realize a lot of the bacteria and parasites in the early 60s, if you were on a ketogenic type creation, meaning that you were on a non-sugar diet and you were in a state of ketosis, fats and ketosis, your creation of ketone bodies from the liver seems to have been putting you to destroy LPS naturally. Then we have the traditionals where we start to see older people giving you washout for parasites and worms, which is fine. But they did not understand that some of the substances that they were using are also in a state of allowing you to break LPS, flush the gallbladder. Then we heard how fasting was a practice of tradition that was not only traditional use, but that was enforced upon men, and they would see how great they felt, because fasting would of course create a lot of ketone bodies because you are going into the fasted state and you come out feeling better. Not a lot have been said about the immediate feeling pattern after fasting. People would have run back to the sugar-based diet. And in recent time, we all know about insulin resistance, dementia now being called the diabetics number 3. And then we hear about the source of all things insulin resistant. Of various types, various sorts sometimes. But what we have to do is put all these little pieces of the puzzles together to see a reality. I don't have the reality, folks. I'm a truth seeker. I'm seeking after truth, which would be my version of how I see reality. But yet, for all, as an individual, I'm seeing pieces of that puzzle. Again, reality is that big puzzle with multiple pieces, maybe 12 pieces, and I'm only looking at 3 pieces at this point in time. But these 3 pieces, this is the structure that I could phrase and communicate to myself as to what I think is the reality of situations. I'm not advocating for anybody to follow anything that I'm saying. I'm not giving any health advice. I'm just saying that papers would have showed, research papers. This is not a research video, but there is enough research papers showing ketone bodies help break down LPS. Enough research papers showing LPS is Lipopolysaccharides, a creation used by those bacteria, including H. pylori and E. coli, in the stomach to protect themselves from the strong acid. And we know what happens when you do not have strong stomach acid. We know about SIBO, and we start realizing SIBO is nothing more than LPS being attacked by our immune system, consistently trying to get rid of this LPS. And so instead of LPS being so hard, they are attacking literally your flesh. Your autoimmune disease word comes into play. Same thing with the diabetes. The pancreatic cells of the diabetic patient is being attacked by the immune system, because the immune system is seeing this translucent mucogenic layer called LPS and it's attacking it, but you think it's attacking you. And what we need to do, folks, NAC was given to the world in the COVID time as a resurrection of understanding. This is a critical substance to help rid ourselves of LPS and let the immune system recover, or let the antibiotics that you like recover you with your help of your general practitioners, so that you could get back functional structures of your body. Imagine your body, your stomach, your pancreatic beta cells, your knees having the ability to breathe again, literally having the ability to make what they have to make again. In the case of the pancreas, having the ability to push out the insulin, and in the case of the stomach, having the ability to push out stomach acid at a pH is 1 or 2. Your food will digest, your amino acids will become available, your nutrients will be extracted, your nutrients will become available, your body would feel better and lighter. Think about this, and if you need any advice, please reach out to me on my website. Advice is not free. I would like you to know that, but thank you for viewing. Have a wonderful day.